When I was invited to do this talk, I learned a couple of new things that I didn't know about San Francisco. The first was that there are 107 millionaires per square mile. Impressive, right? There are also 160 people experiencing homelessness per square mile. What do the communities we live in look like when they are shaped by such inequality? How do we treat the people at the bottom? Do we even see them as human beings? And if we don't, what might happen if they actually became human through another person's eyes? Since 2011, growth and gentrification have unfolded in San Francisco at a furious pace. My neighborhood used to be part of the Western Addition. With all of the ensuing change, it is now NOPA. Along the way, I watched as 3 of my neighbors, all gentlemen in their 80s, got evicted, start living in their cars, only to have those eventually repossessed, and because shelter waitlists were and still are thousands deep, end up dying before help was available. Around the same time, I took a cab ride that changed my life. As we hit the Tenderloin, which is a neighborhood in San Francisco with the highest concentration of homelessness, the cab driver turned over his shoulder and he said to me, "Welcome to the land of broken dreams." His words were so jarring that I stopped doing whatever I was doing and I looked out the window. And for the first time, despite having been through the Tenderloin hundreds of times before, really saw people. And my first thought was that not a single one of them, when they were little, ever dreamed of growing up to be homeless. And yet there they were. And that thought of them as children really pierced me, because at that time, my own daughter was 5 years old. If you live or work in San Francisco, or just about any community in California, or sadly, even in this country, you have likely witnessed the seemingly intractable challenge that is homelessness. Yet when most of us pass a houseless neighbor on the street, we look the other way. It's understandable. It's hard to reconcile ourselves to the suffering of others around us, especially when we feel powerless to help. That was me until that day, sitting in the cab, when I connected with the simple but powerful truth that these were people with hopes and dreams and fears just like mine. People who, because of 1 or 2 turns of bad luck and no safety net to catch them, just kept falling until they hit bottom. And so sitting in the cab that day, I decided I was going to try to help. Fast forward a few months, and I was in the design district of San Francisco, which is south of Market. And I remember so clearly it was an unusually warm, sunny day. And as I walked, I passed a young woman who was panhandling. She was distraught, disheveled, and she kept saying over and again that she would never be clean. And while I knew that her words probably meant many things, I got curious about what her chances were for getting physically clean, because every houseless person I saw was struggling with hygiene. So I went home that night, and I did the research, and what I found shocked me. I learned that there were 16 shower stalls and about as many toilets for the 7,000 plus men, women, and children experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. And I thought, that cannot be. That happens somewhere else, not in one of the most affluent and progressive cities in the world. And yet, it was true. A few weeks later, I happened to pick up a San Francisco Chronicle, something that I rarely did back then, and I read that Muni was retiring its old diesel buses. And I got this crazy idea as the bells went off in my head to take those buses and convert them into mobile showers and toilets for people, to do something good with something that people love to hate. To me, the obvious need was, it was simple, but I knew that it was about so much more than just getting people clean. Because at the end of the day, a shower, something that we almost all take for granted, connects us with our sense of self and with our dignity. And dignity is a big and powerful concept, and one of its meanings is a sense of pride in oneself and self-respect. In the 3.5 years since launching our mobile hygiene service, we've served over 10,000 Californians, but I will never forget one of our very first guests, a man named Marty, who came to San Francisco from Detroit for a job that unfortunately evaporated by the time he arrived. Because he had used just about his last dollar getting here, he decided that he was going to camp out on the street. He was optimistic that he would find work quickly because San Francisco was booming and his skills as a machinist were in demand. The problem was that the longer he stayed on the street, the less desirable he became to employers and people around him. But he read that Lava Mae was going to be launching soon. And so on the very first day we started, he showed up holding a crumpled piece of newspaper in his hand about our launch that he'd held onto to remind him where to find us. After a few weeks of showering with us, Marty got a job, and he was able to save money and get housed. And while he says that a shower was critical to his success, it was about so much more than that. It was about reconnecting with his dignity and his self-worth. Like Marty, all of our guests have stories. Stories that break our hearts, make us laugh, and remind us that they're just like us. They also share with us that they feel invisible, wandering the city, unwanted and unseen. And oddly enough, this was something that I could personally connect with myself. Coming from a small town in South Texas where you greet everyone you pass on the street, it had always unnerved me, even after decades of living here, to pass another person on the street and actively ignore them, even when you were the only other person on the street with them. And so about a year ago, I got tired of feeling that way, and I decided I would try an experiment. I was going to acknowledge everyone I saw with a nod of the head, making eye contact, or maybe even a greeting. I was a little concerned that people might rebuff me or think I was some weirdo, but I was more curious about what putting myself out there might do for my relationship with San Francisco, a city that I'd always had a passionate love-hate relationship. And it changed it. The pep in my step increased. I found myself smiling much more and generally connected to the people who were occupying the same space as me. And then one day, I stepped out of a Pete's, and about 100 feet ahead of me was a woman sitting on the ground, surrounded by her belongings and a little dog that she had. And I called out, "Good morning," and I startled her. And as I approached, she said, "You see me?" And I said to myself, she must be struggling with a little bit of mental health issues. And I said, "Yes, you're sitting right there in front of me." What happened next took me absolutely by surprise. Her eyes welled with tears, still makes me cry, and she said, "You are the first person to acknowledge my presence in a week. I thought I was a ghost." Sorry. Homelessness destroys your dignity and your sense of self-worth. It makes you invisible and unwanted. Being seen is something that we all need and long for, but it is particularly important to our houseless neighbors. We see it in our work every day as it helps them persevere through seemingly unsurmountable challenges, or, in some cases, return from the brink of suicide because they've been seen and valued and supported. And we call the way that we work radical hospitality. It's radical because this level of care is rarely extended to people moving through homelessness. We believe that raising the bar on how you serve people is revolutionary. Hospitality, because it's rooted in generosity and our shared humanity. We go as many miles as it takes to ensure that our guests leave feeling better than when they arrived, and we recognize that they are just like us. And lastly, the act of taking service to where people are, meeting them in their space, is ultimately an act, we believe, of profound care and respect. And so we take our service, we take radical hospitality to the street. Underpinning it all, again, is this concept of dignity, but this time defined as the state or quality of being worthy of honor or of respect. Because at the end of the day, dignity encompasses both the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you are treated. Since you started, we've learned, sometimes painfully, that there are people who do not believe that we the way that we do. I'm reminded of the time that we were scaling in San Francisco, and one of the new sites that we opened was at the main public library. On the very next day, I received the most vicious email I've ever received in my life. It said, "By washing these animals, you are part of the reason that San Francisco is following ancient Rome into oblivion." Right? My first feeling was absolute and utter shock that anybody could feel that way, much less think I had that much power. Then I got mad, really mad. I wanted to hurt this person, the opposite of radical hospitality. But as I sat with his words, two things hit me. The first was how easy it is for us to disconnect from the suffering of others. And two, how challenging it is for our guests, our houseless neighbors, who field this kind of vitriol regularly. In the end, though, his message turned out to be a gift, because what it did was it strengthened our resolve to connect with everyone we touch, not just our guests, everyone, including people like him who seemingly have lost their way. Because the truth is that radical hospitality works in both directions. Choosing to see affects both the person being seen and the person choosing to see. At a time when we are inundated daily with a barrage of bad news, when we are often more connected with our digital devices than we are to each other, I believe that radical hospitality can offer an antidote to some of what ails us. Imagine, for example, what might change if we turned toward a houseless neighbor, if we turned toward each other and offered our own small gesture of radical hospitality. And now imagine if that happened at scale, which is why I invite you to consider conducting your own experiment in seeing by embracing and unleashing a little radical hospitality in your life. Commit to just one day, just one, of deciding to acknowledge people as you pass them with eye contact, a nod of the head, or, and if you dare, a greeting. I promise it will shift something in you, and very likely the people you encounter. And should you pass a houseless neighbor and not feel comfortable or ready to make a connection, then as you pass them in your mind, just silently acknowledge that they are a human being imbued with dignity, just like you. These are small things, but they can lead to transformation. Mother Teresa once said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone upon the waters to create many ripples." We can all create ripples, and I believe it can start by choosing to see the invisible. Thank you.